This is Democracy Watch. Mark, it looks like the threats that Donald Trump has been leveling against Chicago are finally bearing themselves out. It looks like the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is launching Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago. Can you explain, first and foremost, the legality of this move? And we're going to talk a little bit in a few moments about the cases that are ongoing in California. But on its face, the legality of being able to send federal troops into Chicago.
Yeah, first of all, shame on all of the legacy media that kept saying, well, Donald Trump hasn't decided what he's going to do with Chicago. We knew what he was going to do with Chicago. You and I talked about what he was going to do in Chicago. Anyone paying attention to what Donald Trump said knew what he was going to do in Chicago. So he has launched this effort as he himself said he was going to. And then the legacy media found every excuse in the book to hedge it. But, this is going to start with ICE agents, with DHS agents, with other federal law enforcement operating in the city. Look, that is going to largely be legal. They are federal law enforcement. They are entitled to enforce the nation's immigration laws. Now, whether they do it in a fashion that complies with the U.S. Constitution, whether they do it in a way that complies with due process is something to be seen. And I'm not yet ready to say they won't, but let's just say we should all be looking. There's a reason why the governor has correctly said people need to take video of what's going on. But I think the real story here, Brian, is stage two. And this goes to the what Donald Trump posted over the weekend about, the Department of War and Chicago, because I think that this is all a thinly veiled pretext to create a conflict, create a standoff like we saw in parking lots in Los Angeles.
Yep.
I mean, it wasn't much that we saw in Los Angeles that was the pretext to sending in the Marines and the National Guard. And I think that will be the next shoe to drop. And we all need to be prepared for it because that one is probably, as it was in LA, going to violate the federal Posse Comitatus Act. But whether Donald Trump will care, no. The question is whether the legacy media will report it accurately and the people of Chicago and around the country will wake up to what's happening and they'll speak out.
When we saw the same thing happen in Los Angeles, Trump used the presence of ICE and the largely expected pushback in Los Angeles to ICE as a pretext to be able to send in the National Guard. We now know that that is largely illegal because we've heard from Judge Breyer in a trial court in California that he wasn't allowed to send those troops in to do law enforcement work. That case is now in front of the Ninth Circuit. But where does that leave Trump in terms of the same thing happening in Chicago? How much of a deterrent is that? How much of a legal deterrent is that?
Yeah, so I want to make sure people are really tracking, Brian, what you and I are talking about when we talk about a pretext. Okay. What Donald Trump is doing is he is sending in federal law enforcement in an overly aggressive way with the desired outcome from his standpoint of triggering protests. Okay, so when we talk about like, triggering a response, we're talking about people who are upset, understandably upset at what is happening in their communities, and they are making their displeasure known. Now, might they be doing it by taking shopping carts in a parking lot at a Home Depot in Los Angeles that we all saw videos of, and trying to barricade the parking lot in some makeshift way? Yes, but is that outside of the capability of the LAPD to control? No. Is that outside the ability of the Chicago Police Department to keep law and order? No. But then he uses that as a pretext to send in not only in LA the National Guard, remember, Brian, he sent in the Marines, right? He sent in active duty Marines into Los Angeles. And that is ultimately what Judge Breyer found to be illegal because these law enforcement, these federal troops were performing policing functions, which they're not allowed to do under federal law, under a law passed in the 1870s called the Posse Comitatus Act. Okay, so what is the likelihood that we see this repeat in Chicago? Brian, my fear is that he's actually going to try to trigger a bigger response in Chicago than he even got in LA. And I think Tom Homan has been signaling that if you watch what some of his comments have been, the White House borders are, and if you look at what Donald Trump has posted on his social media, it looks like he is trying to goad an even bigger response than we saw in LA. to give an even further excuse. And then finally, I'd add, Brian, this was some reporting that Democracy Docket did, a week ago based on what Governor Pritzker said. Remember, Governor Pritzker said that he believes that this time when there's a deployment, it won't come from the National Guard from Illinois, right? And California came from the National Guard in California. He suggested that it may come from National Guards men and women from out of state. He mentioned Texas. And that would again be a further provocation, a further way of inciting among the citizenry of Illinois further reactions in an effort to again escalate. I mean, maybe you can put up on the screen what Kristi Noem said when Joe Biden was in the White House about what she thought would happen if Joe Biden put in the National Guard.
Right, now put that right here on the screen. She had said back in 2024, if Biden federalizes the National Guard, and he was talking about handling border issues, then we've got a war on our hands.
Democrats have been encouraging this president. They've been encouraging President Biden to come after our states' rights. They've been talking about federalizing our National Guard, which would be the first time in American history that we would have a president that would pay soldiers to stand down, to actually not protect America. And if he's willing to do that and to take away my authority as governor, as commander-in-chief of those National Guard, boy, we do have a war on our hands.
Wow.
Yeah, right? I mean, now, that was when she was the governor of South Dakota. Now she is the head of DHS, who's in charge of all this.
Yeah.
You have Donald Trump actually posting on social media that there will be a war in Chicago. You have Tom Homan going on the cable talk shows this weekend and saying it'll be a war, but it's not a war against Chicago, it's a war against these gangs and all that. I mean, will the real Kristi Noem stand up, or is there a real Kristi Noem? Or is this just all situational?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think whatever allows Kristi Noem to fail up the fastest and the farthest, she is taking her cues from the Nancy Maces of the party and the Marco Rubios of the party. Whatever you have to do to expose yourself as the biggest, most obsequious supplicant to Donald Trump, that is the path that these people are going to take. If it means they have to prove themselves out to be a hypocrite, if it means they have to contradict their own statements, so be it. That is the cost of their dignity is clearly a price that these people are willing to pay. Mark, what would you recommend that the people of Chicago do in response to this? And I ask that because if Chicagoans take to the streets and exercise their First Amendment rights, the administration is going to view this as some escalation, and they're going to say, look, all of these people are on the streets right now. Now we have no choice but to send in federal troops or the National Guard or the Marines. But if they do nothing, then that is the very capitulation that we've been decrying. And frankly, none of this is acceptable. And so to do nothing is basically to allow him to know that he's got carte blanche to do it in Chicago, and then, the subsequent cities next, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Milwaukee, Detroit, whatever it may be. So what's the response here, given the fact that either way, it could feel like a lose-lose no matter how we respond?
Look, I think that Governor Pritzker has been handling this 100% correctly. I don't think you can back down from a bully. I don't think you should tell people that they need to cower in fear. I do think that people need to exercise their First Amendment rights, but they need to do it within the scope of the First Amendment. Martin Luther King Jr. was successful because he led a nonviolent movement. It was a disciplined movement of nonviolence. It brought the spotlight to the wrongness of what was happening in the Jim Crow South, but it did not allow itself to get out of control and therefore be able to be blamed. So I think the people of Chicago need to protest lawfully. I think they need to protest loudly and peacefully. And I think that they need to keep the moral high ground in that so that they do not offer an easy pretext for what Donald Trump wants. But I don't think that cowering and hiding is ever going to be successful with Donald Trump.
Is there any way that his comments preceding all of this, which were, something along the lines of now the people of Chicago are going to, get to know what the Department of War is really about, is there some way that Pritzker and Illinois could use his comments against him if and when this thing is challenged in court?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. If you want to know intent, there is no better intent than to hear out of the defendant's mouth themselves what they said. And Donald Trump posted what he posted, and all of the Republicans can act like that they didn't know what he meant and they didn't understand this and they didn't see it. But the fact is, he said what he said, and that will be exhibit one in any lawsuit that J.B. Pritzker and the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago brings against the Trump administration. I can promise you almost with a certainty that that'll be the case.
Does intent matter, or does it just matter what actually happens, the net effect, the practical result of his actions?
No, intent matters. Intent matters. I mean, ultimately the facts speak for themselves, but you interpret facts through the prism of how people intend them to be interpreted. And if Donald Trump intended this to be the use of the military against a U.S. city, then that goes a long way towards explaining whether or not, if they deploy the military, what its purpose was, whether it was foreseeable that what happened would happen. So no, I think it is very relevant. I think that Donald Trump is oftentimes on the losing end of litigation because he is so clear about his intent. And I've talked about this before. It's one of the reasons we have been very successful in my litigation around voting and free and fair elections. We've oftentimes been very successful because Republicans actually say what they intend to do. Donald Trump says what he intends to do, and that is oftentimes very, very powerful evidence. And I think that has also been true in some of these cases we've seen in the last 7 months. Some of the Doge cases, some of the appropriations cases, some of where they've frozen money. Donald Trump has given the plaintiffs the sort of the roadmap because he says, I want to do something that is illegal and unconstitutional. And then the Department of Justice has to wind up saying, well, he didn't really do anything illegal or unconstitutional.
Well, you had mentioned the cases that you're litigating, and it's true, you are one of the few people that's actually fighting back where it matters most, which is in the courts right now. A small step that everybody who's watching this video can take to support Mark's work and to support fearless independent journalism is to sign up for Democracy Docket. It is the news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. An amazing resource. I use it on a daily basis. We use it for the majority of our Democracy Watch videos right here. So if you are not yet subscribed, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Great way to support Mark, to support independent media. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.